Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome USGLC co-chair, Senator Norm Coleman.
Thank you. Good morning. First of all, I'm so pleased to be here with you. The impact that the USGLC has in Washington is because of the impact we have with you in your communities, in your towns, in your cities. That's why we can do the things that we do. So without you, someone once said, a leader without followers is just a guy taking a walk, okay? We're just taking a walk without you. So thank you for being here. Thank you for all you do. If I can, just a point of personal privilege, I was part of the delegation of the United States Senate when President Bush announced the PEPFAR, and we went to the first visit to Africa before PEPFAR. We went to a hospital in South Africa that I will say was a death camp. People went there to die. I went back a couple of years later after PEPFAR. President Bush, in fact, we were at an orphanage of kids whose parents had passed from AIDS. President Bush said, God is good, and their response was all the time, all the time. The change that I saw within that period was stunning. And so to be there today, still on the battlefield, for the work that you have done to ensure that funds now are going to be still flowing, really makes a profound difference. This is real stuff. This is, you save one life, change the world. We're changing the world in a lot of ways. So I thank you for all that you do. I don't know if the present time is as critical and challenging as we've ever had. Liz, escalating crisis, Ebola now in Africa, escalating conflicts, competition from adversaries, China and Russia. And so as we approach our 250th anniversary, I think what we're reminded is that America's leadership is not just about our military leadership, by the way, is important. We are the greatest military force in the world. We're also the greatest humanitarian force in the world. We're a nation built on a foundation of faith. We believe in our kind of our gut and our visceral that to whom much is given, much is expected. And we understand the practicality that if you're out there with diplomacy, if you're out there dealing with global health, if you're out there dealing with food crisis, that you provide greater stability, which provides for greater peace and greater opportunity, and the less need for military force. So all these pieces come together. So today's discussion will explore how America can continue to lead through strength, through purpose, strategic vision in an increasingly complex world. And we are fortunate to have with us a group of outstanding leaders. Senator Andy Kim, the junior senator from New Jersey. David Miliband, President and CEO of the International Rescue Committee. And General Joseph Votel, former commander of U.S. Central Command, with nearly 4 decades of service in the United States Army. And again, another point of personal privilege, a former constituent of mine from the great city of St. Paul. So great to have General Votel here with us. Ladies and gentlemen, and to moderate our conversation will be Tjada Joy and McKenna, who serves as CEO of Mercy Corps. Senator Kim, General Votel, David, Tjada, welcome.
Well, good morning, everyone. I have the pleasure of moderating this great panel. We are going to start out overall and then get to the heady topics that worry us about the overall. Obviously, we all know the world is a pretty dangerous place right now. We have been dealing with things in the Middle East, to Ukraine, to Sudan, and on top of it now, we have now an emerging outbreak of Ebola in the DRC. We also, in the midst of this, have 123 million people displaced in the world due to conflict, violence, and persecution. So we already have many powder kegs sitting for humanitarian crisis, and in some places like Sudan, it already is. So I want to take advantage of the expertise that we have in the room and ask about the humanitarian hotspots. So we'll do that in a minute. But right now, if we think big picture, and I'll start with you, Senator Kim, what do we need to do as a country to meet the moment right now?
Yeah. Well, thank you so much for having me up on stage. Thank you, everybody, for coming out and what you're doing to be able to make sure that lawmakers and others understand the importance. As someone who is on Capitol Hill, I can tell you we don't have enough people coming to our offices talking to us about the challenges that we face globally. And I think that's part of it. I was actually just reflecting on this the other day. I was talking to some of my colleagues, because many of them don't know, actually 20 years ago to this year, in 2006, I was a graduate student fellow in the Senate Foreign Relations Committee. And I worked there, shared an office with Foreign Service Officer Chris Stevens, who went on to be Ambassador Chris Stevens. And I was working on Darfur. I was working on the challenges of the crisis at that moment. Now, 20 years later, I am back at the Senate. I'm now a senator. But the question is, do I have any greater ability to be able to try to shape what is happening on the ground for the better in Darfur? And I think it kind of gets to the challenges that we're facing right now, because the fact that I even have to ask that question when we realize our country is abandoning our focus on trying to address these needs, recognizing that this is not about charity, this is about global security, it's about global leadership. And so, first and foremost is a question about what is our role, and that's what is central to this organization's thinking, which is why I appreciate you gathering. But right now, we are not even talking about this within the Senate. I mean, the number of conversations, substantive conversations that I have had with my senators about what's happening in Sudan and many of these other crises, I can count on one hand. And so this is why it's so essential that you are bringing this out. If we aren't looking at it, if we're not paying attention, and if we're not feeling the demand from people to focus on this, then it's not going to happen. And that's what is so essential about what you all are doing.
Yeah, thank you. General Votel.
Well, thank you very much. It's good to be here, and I'm glad to be associated with this great organization. I think the theme for me today, in terms of meeting the moment, is strategic integration. I mean, that's the big idea here. I was doing a little reading this morning in preparation for this, and I reread a little bit on President Eisenhower's Solarium Commission back in 1953, when he was struggling with how he was going to deal with the emergence of the Soviet Union. And what he did was he pulled together this commission, pulled the people from not just from the military and from the State Department, but from the private sector, brought them all together. And out of that commission came our containment strategy that served us very well for 30 plus years over a variety of different administrations. And it provided the continuity and provided a strategy around which the military, the diplomatic efforts, our economic efforts, our informational efforts could coalesce to help us move forward in a very coherent manner and make a difference, not just for our country, but really for the world in many, many ways. So I think the big idea here from me today is strategic integration.
Thank you. Thank you. David, what do we need to do as a country to meet the moment?
Well, thanks very much, Tjada. I think it's a tribute to the American sense of humor that you've invited a British guy to come and advise you about the next 250 years. But we did such a good job 250 years ago that obviously it's nice to be back. I think the theme of the next 2 days, today's conference and tomorrow's meetings, is debunking the myths, taking away the excuses that say foreign aid isn't important, America's global leadership isn't important. The myth that there's no impact, when in fact IRC's malnutrition programs have a 92% recovery rate. The myth that it's all too expensive and the money goes to waste, when we've delivered 30 million vaccine shots in 6 war-torn East African countries, plus Yemen, at $2 a shot. And also the myth that Americans don't care. Because in the polling last year, what became clear is that 89% of Americans, 84% of Republicans, 94% of Democrats, supported 1% of the federal budget going on foreign aid, which of course was the amount before last year's cuts. So for me, the power of today and tomorrow is debunking those myths, slaying those myths, and making sure that the truth actually gets in front of policymakers.
Thank you. Thank you. And right now, with this Ebola outbreak, we're really testing our ability to move quickly and to respond and to pull things together. The International Rescue Committee, David, despite recent funding cuts, you all have announced that you are doubling down on your commitment to strengthen health systems in fragile and conflict-affected states. And you've urged delegates at the World Health Assembly last month to continue investing in this area. Senator Kim, the administration has announced new funding commitments to support Ebola response efforts, but it has also at the same time proposed significant cuts to global health programs, and funding that's already been approved by Congress remains unspent. How can Congress work with the administration to ensure that these resources are deployed effectively in the manner of strategic integration? Like, what can we be doing to make sure that they're deployed effectively and working with this administration so that we are prepared and have improved preparedness for future outbreaks as well?
Well, the key really is about coalition building right now. You know, my side does not have enough votes to be able to implement this on our own. And as we've seen over the course of this last year, there are a few Republicans in the Senate that are willing to join up on certain issues, but they are strategically choosing where to be able to make their stand, where to be able to make the fight, and trying to figure out how to be able to best convince them that certain things are important is necessary. For instance, we were able to reverse much of the cuts that this Trump administration was trying to do to NIH funding, to other types of things when we look at what we were trying to get done when it comes to Gavi and be able to continue on that funding. This administration was trying to zero out that funding when it came to assistance with global vaccines. We were able to get that funding back in, but now we're continuing to see that there are challenges on the implementation, the execution of that money. You know, so those same senators that we were able to build that coalition through an appropriations process, it's one of the few places where we've seen Republicans maybe not vocal with their words, but at least pushing forward and pushing back against this administration on the funding side. But we need that execution. So all of us thinking through, you know, what is that coalition going to look like? And is that coalition willing to put things on the line to be able to deliver? So like right now, for instance, the Senate has before us this week $70 billion for ICE and CBP enforcement, a reconciliation bill, zero in there about healthcare, zero in there about foreign policy and global leadership. You know, are there senators, Republican senators, willing to say, I'm not going to move forward on these types of things unless we see implementation on other aspects of what I want to see done? I'm going to continue to try to push and build that coalition of 51. I'm asking for your help to be able to help build it too.
Thank you. Thank you. It's David, the fact that we have to really build the case for this and have the coalition for this and struggling for it is alarming. Can you just explain to the audience the potential fallout if this Ebola outbreak spreads further and further reflect on what this means even for those who might live far away from this outbreak? Right?
Well, the Eastern Democratic Republic of Congo, I mean, this is a private meeting, undemocratic Republic of Congo in all sorts of ways. The Eastern DRC has 120 different militias that are operating there. It's a war zone. That makes it more difficult. Secondly, this disease takes 21 days to incubate in your body. That's the second reason why this is spreading fast. Thirdly, it's not the Zaire brand of Ebola. It's a particular new strain. There were actually 230 cases last year, and there was no work done to try and develop a vaccine. So it's not a question of whether it spreads. It's now spreading very fast, fueled by those three factors, including across the border into Uganda. We have a lot of experience, along with other NGOs, in addressing Ebola. Building hospitals after the outbreak starts is not the answer. If you're actually going to address this, you need clear leadership, and that's going to come from the World Health Organization, which sadly the United States is no longer a member of, and also the African Center for Disease Control. It's going to come through engagement with local populations, because this is not a virus. It's not going to become a pandemic. It's spread by the transfer of bodily fluids, but it means really engaging with the local population. I want to make one point about that. 2/3 of the victims of the disease so far are women and girls. So it's not, quote unquote, woke or politically correct to say that we have to target those women and girls. It's not politically correct, it's just correct. It needs to be done. And the local engagement is also about safe burial practices, because it's at burial time that most of the spreading happens. Thirdly, it's about a surge of resourcing. The administration has announced $23 million. We need to go multiples of that. 5x, 10x, more than that. Because obviously the protective equipment is absolutely key for health workers, because if we can't help the health workers, we're going to lose even more people. Fourthly, there's an absolutely critical need to recognize that while, quote unquote, life-saving, immediate life-saving aid is vital, if you're cutting off health facilities in the name that they're not life-saving, you're just brewing up trouble down the line. And a year ago, we had to reconfigure our health, maybe Mercy Corps had the same, we had to reconfigure our health services in the Democratic Republic of Congo away from pandemic preparedness, away from the monitoring of disease, away from some of the water and sanitation, latrines and other facilities, towards a narrow definition of life-saving. And we warned at the time, this is just brewing up trouble. And so as sure as night follows day, you end up in this situation where you've got a further Ebola outbreak that is already on the run. If I've got time, I just want to make a final point as a non-American here. America was the anchor of the global aid system. That doesn't mean you did everything. You can have an argument about others should have done more. But the anchoring meant you were the fastest to respond. You had the full spectrum of engagement. You invested in the basic science as well as in the immediate cash to reach. And I think there's a very, very big, as someone who lives and works in New York, I'm a visitor to your country, but there's a massive question for you to ask about whether or not you want to play that role again. I would argue, as coming from an allied country, that it's incredibly important for the free world and the whole world that America does play that role, because no one else can be the anchor. But there are plenty of countries around the world who are going to prosper when the world doesn't have an anchor. And so I hope that as well as the practicalities of how to contain Ebola, there'll also be a wider lesson learning about what it means to be part of a global system. Because the truth about the modern world is that it's more connected than ever before, and therefore the risks spread faster than ever before, and it's going to take really determined, patient, strategic engagement for this to be a world that doesn't just spread risks, but also spreads opportunities and security.
With global health and Ebola, we might have to make the case that it is relevant for all of us, but certainly I'm moving to the Middle East now because as the recent events with the Strait of Hormuz have inflicted gas prices and fertilizer shortages, it's very clear that that conflict is affecting us, especially for U.S. farmers and agriculture around the world. General Votel, drawing from your experience as the CENTCOM commander, are there lessons that you'd point out about the importance of strong collaboration across the defense, diplomacy, development spectrum in the region today? And if the President Trump called you into the Oval Office today and asked you for your advice on the Middle East, what would you say?
Okay. Yeah, thank you very much for that question. So, I think kind of going back to maybe some of David's points here, I think the United States has always been best in its responses when we have pulled on all of our levers of national power. I mean, I go back and I think about the campaign against ISIS in Iraq and Syria a few years ago. It was something that I was very intimately involved with. But, what we recognized very early on in that campaign was that the military had to be fully integrated with kind of the civilian diplomatic development side of the house as we were doing that. So as we moved to conduct major combat operations in a big city like Mosul, we had to make sure that we had planned with humanitarian planners and with our diplomats how we were going to do that at the same time that we protected the civilian population. So, I think as I look at what we're dealing with now in the Middle East, I think we have put a lot on the backs of the military, and there's a lot that the military can do. They should be able to, for $1 trillion a year, we should be able to deliver military outcomes, and I think in many cases we have. But I think what you learn out of military experience is that ultimately, in many, many cases, the military by itself is not decisive. What is decisive is the diplomatic follow-up that comes with that. It is the economic tools that are applied in the wake of that and in support of that. And it's the informational aspect that we bring to bear that really consolidates what we do militarily into a strategic victory. And that's what I think we're wrestling with right now. We've been very heavy on the military side, and we're now trying to pull in the diplomatic efforts and some other things right now. And I think that's affecting us as we move forward. To the second part of your question, I think if I was to walk into the Oval Office and give the president some advice, I think my advice would be, we are where we are right now, and it's important to move forward and try to bring this to a resolution that is ultimately can be in our best interests. And I think there are certain things the military can do to assist with that, but I think the real effort has to be in the diplomatic side, and we've got to engage in a level of diplomacy that is going to move this in a direction that is going to bring this to a conclusion, and we'll do so in a way that benefits the United States. And I think what that means is we are going to have to suppress our appetite a little bit in terms of the things that we are trying to accomplish in this, given where we are today. We can have a debate about whether we should have done this or not. I think that's a fair debate to have, but we are where we are today. And I think we have to move forward and try to consolidate some gains that will hopefully give us a platform upon which we can do other things that resolve this. Yeah. I don't think it's going to be resolved quickly. I don't think it's going to be resolved comprehensively. Yeah.
As you mentioned, diplomacy matters, and Senator Kim, I'm going to call on you to pull on another part of your career. You were a career officer of the State Department in Afghanistan, where you advised General Petraeus and John Allen. Can you share one example of where you saw firsthand how U.S. diplomatic and humanitarian tools were indispensable? And then maybe after that, can you talk about how you're talking to your colleagues or working with them to make sure that we maintain diplomacy as a central tool?
Yeah, I'm happy to go into that. Actually, I might just build off of what you just talked about, because I worked also a different part of that effort on the counter-ISIS. So, I'm somebody that started my career at USAID, I was at State Department, I was at Pentagon. So I've seen these 3 Ds of defense, diplomacy, and development working hand in hand. And what was just said is absolutely right. It needs to happen comprehensively and strategically. And what we tried to do with the counter-ISIS fight is, while the military effort was underway, we were coming up with a strategy about the day after, about what comes next, and to be able to fill those vacuums and it wasn't just about the United States either. We built a global coalition where the UK played their part, Australia, Italy, others were playing their part. And we had just that kind of deconfliction where we all understood what role we were trying to do. And that took months in prep ahead of the siege of Mosul and other operations, so that we are ready to go and deploy. So I wanted to just give you that and pull a little bit further on that thread with the specificity, because that is what we need right now. That is what we need, not just in the Middle East, but we need it all over the place. And I think what it also shows is that multilateralism isn't just a nice to have. This isn't just about trying to build up your numbers. It's about assigning specific roles and responsibilities. And sure, some of our partners, maybe they could have done more on different aspects of this, and those are important conversations as we have going forward. But as we try to think through not just a condemnation of this might makes right transactional politics that many of us reject, but when we think through what is it that we actually need to build going forward through multilateralism, minilateralism, and these other opportunities, I think looking towards those examples of a true strategy that is comprehensive and built with coalition power is going to be necessary. So I hold that. I mean, it wasn't perfect. Yeah. There are a lot of things that I look back we could have done better on, but that type of intentionality and strategy that didn't just pull in the political appointees, but actually harnessed and mobilized the expertise within our State Department and other civil and foreign service and military experts. That is not happening right now. Yeah. When I talk to people at the State Department, they are being left in the dark about so much of what's happening. So you might see Jared Kushner and Witkoff talking to Iran or talking to others, but they're not doing anything that resembles what I would call diplomacy.
Yeah, that's for sure. David, you and I spend our time thinking about what all this means for the world's most vulnerable, and obviously we're feeling the effects of the gas prices, but we know that the Strait of Hormuz is really creating like a food security time bomb. I think it's a phrase that we both use. Why should we, and can you tell us what this is doing to the price of fertilizer and why we should be concerned about what these shifts mean in lower income countries?
Well, I spent 3 years as foreign minister in the UK from 2007 to 2010 negotiating with the Iranian government and in the early stages of the attempt to get a diplomatic resolution of this nuclear issue. And there's really a lot of wisdom in what the general and the senator have said so far. I want to put it, though, in very, very stark terms. This war is not going to be over. There may be a ceasefire, but that doesn't mean the war is over. There may be a cessation of hostilities, but that doesn't mean the war is over. And it won't be over because there'll be so many outstanding issues, not just the nuclear issue of the 400 kilograms of 60% enriched uranium. And just to remember in your head, the Hiroshima bomb was a 60% enriched uranium. The attempt is to get it to 90%, but 60% enriched uranium is very dangerous. It's not going to be over because of the regional proxies that are important. It's not going to be over because of the ballistic missiles and the drone production. Now, it may be over because there's a settlement around the Strait of Hormuz, but what the Iranian regime always warned, including in my time, which is that they could close the strait if they want to, they've now proved that they can. So we're in a new world. And it's a new world where the Middle East and the wider world needs to hedge against the danger that the straits get closed again. Because there's a 2-hour conflict, a 2-day conflict, or a 2-week conflict, or a 2-month conflict in the future. And that's important because it is a quote-unquote choke point. It's not just 20% of the world's oil that goes through the Straits of Hormuz, it's also 35% of the world's fertilizer. So if you're a farmer in West Africa trying to do planting and fertilizer on your soil in April, May, June of this year, you're suddenly confronted with a crisis because your fertilizer is so much more expensive and your fuel is so much more expensive. And so it's not very difficult mathematics to see what the danger is. There's a small point as well that there was a humanitarian hub in Dubai which had a lot of medical equipment, including from my organization. That was obviously blocked off for a significant period too. So a choke point is an area that gives leverage to anyone with control over that choke point. And because of the geography, we're now in a world where Iran has proven its power over the Straits of Hormuz. And Saudi Arabia can get its oil out through the Red Sea, although in parenthesis, remember, the Houthis have capacity in respect of the Red Sea. So the point I would make is that for all of you, I live in New York, so I don't have a car, but for all of you who live in sunny Virginia, there is, you can see your gas prices going up. And that's annoying. But if you're on the precipice because you're a farmer seeking to feed yourself and your family in West Africa or elsewhere, if you're an aid organization trying to deal with 400% increase in insurance premiums in Yemen, if you're trying to deliver fuel and you've got to pay for it because you've got to get humanitarian supplies there, we're all in a new world where everything's going to be more expensive because of the risk premium, but also because of the direct impact. And when the World Food, you've got David Beasley, I think, coming here later. He's an outstanding leader, was a tremendous leader of the World Food Program. The World Food Program today is saying there's a 45 million person increase in the number of people facing level 3 crisis levels of food insecurity. That means hunger. And there were 310 million before this crisis started, and now it's 355 million. So when you ask about the impacts, they're both direct and indirect. And if you give an ex-politician a platform, he'll speak for too long, so I apologize. It's very nice. It's not the House of Commons, so you're not interrupting me. Just a tiny point. Let's not forget, there's 1 million people in Lebanon who've been displaced from their homes as a consequence of one of the rebounds of the conflict that started on the 28th of February. And I was there in Beirut 4 weeks ago. 1 in 5 people in Lebanon is now displaced from their homes. And that is an acute emergency, as well as the protracted consequences that we're seeing around the world.
I want to make sure that we quickly get to a few other things. Great power competition. President Trump was in China recently. That visit was followed by Vladimir Putin announcing his own visit to Beijing. We are clearly in this great power competition with China, whether it's in the race for critical minerals, where China controls 90% of the production, or vying for influence for the African continent, or saber rattling with Taiwan. Senator Kim, you've talked about the importance of economic security. Like, why are America's international affairs agencies central to our critical minerals strategy?
When I worked at the National Security Council, we were often told, focus in on the foreign policy, don't engage on domestic policy, don't go talk to the Domestic Policy Council. It was like a firewall, an intentionality. And it was done in purpose to try to say, we're not trying to politicize foreign policy. And I agree with that. I think the last place that partisan politics belongs is in the Situation Room. But in that division, I think we lost sight of the fact that domestic policy impacts foreign policy, and foreign policy impacts domestic policy. And as someone who's worked now almost equal time in the executive and the legislature, I see that clearer and clearer. And so I've really been thinking this through about a sense of American resilience. When we are in a moment of competition, the largest amount of competition that our nation's faced in over a century, we have to be thinking about our own vulnerabilities. Economic vulnerabilities certainly need to be thought of as important as national security vulnerabilities. When we are at a time when 60% of Americans can't handle a $1,000 emergency, 40% of Americans can't handle a $400 emergency. As the minister said, we're experiencing that right now. This is not theoretical. Just in terms of gas prices going up, Americans have paid more than $52 billion more since the beginning of this Iran war on gas and diesel. So it's happening now. That $400 emergency is now. And yes, we are a great nation, but it's like a skyscraper that doesn't have the shock absorbers to handle an earthquake. We need to be able to build a sense of resilience. That means assessing our vulnerabilities. Critical minerals, pharmaceuticals, energy production is a major problem in this kind of capacity. So what we're trying to do through infrastructure law or chips and science, that has an impact on what we can be doing globally. But also on top of this, it's about making sure that we can speak human about our foreign policy. And as you go to the Hill tomorrow, as you go and engage communities around the country, first of all, we have to go and we have to listen to people about what's on their mind, not just go and dictate what we think is the right thing for our country to do when it comes to foreign policy, but be able to go and listen and to be able to make that case, show respect to a population in this country that it just believes that the status quo is broken. And in many respects, they are right. The fundamental status quo has been broken. But the question is, how do we make sure we listen to them, bring them along, gain that sense of credibility and trust, and be able to push forward? And I really do think that in this era of competition, and it's not just about competition, it's also an era we are in the age of crisis.
Yes.
And the crises we will face aren't going to stop in 2.5 years when we have a new president. We are in an era of crisis that will continue on both domestically and internationally. And I think a strategy of addressing national project on resilience is necessary. That is not an end in itself. It is not just to hunker down and try to rebuild or build anew, but it is ultimately a sense of resilience that will ultimately lead to new opportunity. And I think that that's how we're going to navigate this moment.
Yeah, I love that, American resilience. That's a great term. Speaking of American resilience and the different tools, so General Votel, in your role as CENTCOM commander, you testified that China's Belt and Road Initiative has produced not only profit-generating projects for the PRC in key regions, but it's also about improving China's military posture around the world. Recognizing the array of domains in which the U.S. must compete with China, what are the civilian tools that we should be prioritizing to counter China in Asia, Africa, and beyond?
Yeah, it's a great question. And, as a CENTCOM commander, I testified before the Senate Armed Services Committee that the greatest threat was, in fact, what we were dealing with in the Asian Pacific, despite the fact that we had ongoing combat operations in CENTCOM. So it's a recognition that there are bigger things out there that we have to pay attention to. From a civilian, standpoint, certainly diplomacy leads the way in terms of this. Building partnerships, building relationships, I think are very important. It is concerning, it should be concerning to all of us in this room that as we sit here today, there are over 100 embassies around the world that do not have a confirmed United States ambassador. That is astounding. It is astounding that we have not done that. Now, I know it takes some time to get people through the confirmation process and
most of them are not even nominated right now. So.
In your defense.
Yeah.
I definitely get that. But that is really where the rubber meets the road in terms of our engagement overseas, is by having strong diplomatic outposts in all locations, but especially in the most important locations where our interests are really laid bare. So we've got to put the effort into getting people into positions. The first rule is you got to show up. Mm-hmm. So we have to show up with our diplomats. Second of all, we need to look at development dollars, and we need to look at how we are investing military aid to support our partners out there. We've talked a little bit about Lebanon right now. I think we missed an opportunity with Lebanon, frankly. It's both a military one and it's a political and diplomatic one here. When President Aoun went in here about 18 months ago, I know him. He was the chief of defense there. He's a good man. He cares about his people. He cares about doing the right thing, but he didn't get a lot of help from us in terms of that. Didn't get a lot of help in stabilizing the military. That would have just been money. We could have provided some training to them. We could have helped with some civil military implementation thing that would have helped him as he tried to project power down in the southern part of the country. But we haven't done that, and now we are where we are in Lebanon, and it's affecting what is happening right now. So we've got to look at the development aspects of this. I think I'll end on this. I think the last area where we need to focus on is on the information aspect of this. A mainstay of American power, in my view, over the last number of decades has been the power of our ideas and our ability to get those things out there. We had an organization called the U.S. Information Agency. It's long gone. That's an anachronism of perhaps of the Cold War, but it was an agency that really focused on getting our messages out there. And the messages of things that the United States stood for, the things that we backed around the world, that is really important. And I think that's an area where we can do this. I guess the final thing would be the power of our business, the power of industry. Don't forget the fact that the Marshall Plan that we implemented after World War II was not implemented by the military. It was not implemented by the Department of State. It was implemented by American business executives that went to Germany, went to Japan, and helped lead the rebuilding of our adversaries so that we could create stability long term. The power of our business, the power of our private sector and our capital markets are something that needs to be leveraged much more.
Yeah, no, thank you. Thank you for that. There are a lot more topics we could have talked about, including Ukraine. These wars have been building upon each other, and we've seen people learn from each other in these wars, which is quite tragic. But, despite the many things we could be talking about, I want to close with this, and that's the topic of hope, because we need to motivate people towards something. Surveying the state of the world and the multiple layers of humanitarian crises we are facing, this can be overwhelming and discouraging. So as we try to do what's best for our country, or whichever country that is for you, David, as we try to do our best for the country each day and make a difference in the world, what gives you hope? And I'll start with you, Senator Kim.
I'll just be quick here, as I know we're coming to a close. Today's election day in New Jersey. And we're entering election day in New Jersey with a level of turmoil and unrest in the streets of New Jersey unlike anything I've seen during my time representing it. It has been a very difficult past week. And still, people are going to show up today. They're going to show up in record numbers. They are paying attention. They are desperate for a sense that their voice is being heard. And not just by me, but from the rest of the country. They've been asking me, is the rest of the country paying attention to what's happening here? Because it's not just about New Jersey. So I would say that I feel hope, because despite of how bad things are right now in my state and around this country, people are staying engaged. I'll just end on this. I've been saying for a lot lately this line. I say, I believe that the opposite of democracy is apathy. It's if we give up and feel that sense of hopelessness, that we can't change it. So I just ask you to fight against that sense of hopelessness. You showed up today. You'll go to that Congress tomorrow. But what are you going to do the day after that? What are you going to do next week? What are you going to do next month? Come up with a real plan on your engagement so that we can do our best, because this isn't going to be something we can just win on election day. We have to fight as citizens for our responsibility every day.
Yes. Thank you. Every day. General Votel, what's giving you hope?
So that's a great question. I think what gives me hope is the youth of our country. And when I say youth, I mean people under my age, like under the age of 68. I have an opportunity. I go to West Point and spend time with cadets, and I have an opportunity to get out and talk to a number of college students as I travel around and do some of my speaking and other activities. And I'm always amazed at just how smart, how articulate, how they're thinking about the big ideas, how they're thinking about the big things that are impacting our country. And I know sometimes the youth, our young people, get a bad rap because they might be gamers, or they might be focused on their cell phone or something like that, but that's not my experience. My experience in uniform was that the people that were coming to serve were good Americans. They were standing up for what they thought was right. They came for the right reasons, and they cared about the country. And I think that whole idea can be extended across those generations.
Wonderful, wonderful.
Just 2 points from me. The first is, I think it would be just a dereliction of duty if we ended this 40-minute segment without mentioning the word Sudan. Sudan is the largest humanitarian crisis in the world. It's the largest humanitarian crisis since World War II. It involves 30 million people, and they are suffering for a reason directly linked to what the general said in his last but one answer. Because in the same way that he said in 2025 there was a new government in Lebanon which didn't get support, in 2019 a dictatorship in Sudan was overthrown. There was a new civilian government in Sudan. They didn't get support. And so in 2021, there was a coup. 2023, the people who ran the coup fell out with each other and there was a civil war. So these things come round. And as a gathering of humans who care, who express our empathy through the work that we do, that crisis in Sudan is getting 1/10 of the coverage that it had 20 years ago. Who's the George Clooney of today? And the crisis is 4 times what it was. Yeah. So you can do the maths about what our teams are facing. I'm sure it's the same.
Yeah, that was their lesson.
Secondly, for the question of the hope, when I was in politics, I used to think that hope led to action. Leading an NGO, it's action that leads to hope. Do something. That's actually the way to generate that renewable energy of hope in a better future. And America is a great advertisement for going and doing something. And I think that's an injunction that we should take away with us.
I love that. Thank you, Senator Kim, General Votel and David Miliband. Let's all go do something.